dioxide can be greenhouse gases and contribute to climate change. Ecologically, grasslands also support a tremendous amount of diversity with grazers and predators and plant diversity and insect diversity. So they're really important in that sense too. Because grasslands have been such an important habitat for humans, they're actually one of the most endangered ecosystems on Earth. If you actually think about the amount of land that has been converted out of grasslands and into some other land use form, grasslands have the largest ratio of that conversion and the smallest proportion in protection. So that's they're very at risk in that sense. So great. All right, go ahead and get started. And if we want to come back and talk about grasslands at the end again, that's great.
Hello, everybody. My name is Drew. I'm a senior at Elgin High School, and we are very excited to welcome you to the 2017 National Biodiversity Teach-In. Today we have very fascinating presenter schedule. In a few moments, you will be hearing from Elizabeth Bach, who will be discussing the exciting topic of global soil biodiversity. Let's give a warm welcome to Elizabeth Bach.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Can everyone see the slides and see me? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm hoping this can have some back and forth, so I'm going to keep an eye on my chat, and I'm going to be asking some questions as we go through this. So if teachers or whoever is at the computer, please just kind of type in your responses, and I'll try to catch what I can. And I really want this to be a time to answer your questions as much as anything. So I'm going to start out with some word associations just to kind of get us all thinking about what we might think about in terms of soil or the things that live in soil. So I'm going to show you a word, and I'm going to take 30 seconds, I'll time it, and you in the classrooms just type in the words that come to mind when I show this word on the screen. The first word is, here we go, dirt. What does that make you think of? Okay, I'm seeing some great answers here. I see things like soil, life, worms. You all are thinking really big. This is great. Dirty, cleanliness. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how we think about it. It's the opposite of something that's clean. Bugs, soil, plants, trees, garden, fun. I really like that one. I'm all about fun. Mud, microbes, feces. I saw an ew. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Contaminated, there's another great one. So these are really great responses for the word dirt. So we're going to look at a couple more words, and then we're going to kind of pull it all together. So the next word I have is bug. What does that make you think of? All right, I see lots of great responses up here. Ladybugs, crawling, ew, roaches, diversity, cute. There's lots of cute bugs out there. Food, all right, great. Squish, yeah, we tend to squish a lot of bugs. Plants, pollinators, My sister, okay. I called my sister a bug too. Virus, yeah, okay, yeah, like you get sick, health, yeah, there's a lot of ways we use the word bug, so this is excellent. All right, so the next word we're going to think about real quick is worm. Okay, there's some really good responses here too. Slimy, aeration, garden, creepy. Worms are kind of creepy. Vermiculture, all right. Yep, that's worms at work. Excavator, that's a really good one. Apples, of course, a worm in an apple. Slimy and fun. Yep, slimy doesn't mean disgusting always. Uh, yeah, wriggly, rain. Yeah, when it rains, we often see the worms come to the surface. All right, these are all really great thoughts. All right, I've got a couple more words here. Microbe. Okay, some good responses here too. Tiny, minuscule virus, okay. Germs, bacteria, sick. Yep, a lot of microbes can make us sick. Cell, yep, they usually microbes are single cell. Um, Helpful, they can be helpful. I see one here. Killing machines. A few microbes are killing machines, but not all microbes. Yeah, these are really great. This is exactly what we were looking for. So I've got one more word, I think, here, and that's soil. What does that make you think of? All right, we got lots of great responses here too. One of the first ones that popped up was dirt. Yeah, we tend to equate soil and dirt. Terrain, um, nutrients, earth, organic matter, ground, grass, bugs, mineral, plants, garden seeds, nutrients. Yeah, flowers, fertilizer, not good in the cut, very true. Wet, all right, that's a good one. Great, these are all really great thoughts. And I wanted to do this to kind of get us thinking a little bit about soils and dirt. And so I actually want to start by talking about what is the difference between dirt and soil. And I'm so excited because the word that just popped up on my chat says living. And that is exactly the difference between dirt and soil. Dirt does not have a living component. Dirt is dead. Dirt is an empty wasteland that can't support plant life. By definition, soil is a substrate that is living. You can grow a plant in it. It's a home to millions of organisms. And when you look up the definition, the difference between dirt and soil is that living component. And this is why some people are really particular about using the term soil, because it includes that living component, and without that living component, it's not soil. I'm fine using dirt as a great gateway to think about soils and what that means. So the images I'm popping up here are on the one side. We actually see an image from the Dust Bowl in the 1930s when wind and drought swept so much soil away that it lost the ability to support this life. And on the right, we see someone planting a tree in this dark soil that supports it. So that's the key difference between dirt and soil. And as a soil ecologist, I'm all about the life in the soil. So how much life is in soil? A lot. Actually, more than 25% of all species on Earth live in the soil. And we probably haven't described about 90% of the species that do live in the soil. So it's one of the most diverse habitats on Earth. It's home to a tremendous amount of all life on Earth, and we hardly know anything about it. It's a really exciting place to study. As a scientist, I love it. I'm learning new stuff all the time. In a single handful of soil, you can have anywhere from 10 to 100 million different organisms from over 5,000 different taxa or groups of organisms. So today I'm going to walk us through highlighting some of the diversity of life in soils and hopefully answer your questions. I see a question popped up here about wildfire. I will definitely get to that, but I'm going to wait till a little more appropriate time later in my presentation. Here we go. My job, I am the executive director for something called the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative. And we're a group of scientists, and our goal is to help each other study soil biodiversity, but most importantly, share the importance and the wonder of soil biodiversity with people like you. And one way that we've done this is published a book called the Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas. And I have it here so you all can kind of see. This is a really big coffee table book, and it's full of beautiful pictures. And most of the pictures that you see in my presentation today come from this atlas. And I bring this up because we want this atlas to be used. The PDF version you can download for free online. So teachers, if you want to use this in your classroom, please do. You can also order a print copy. That does cost a little bit of money. We put this together with our colleagues in the European Union. So the European Union Bookshop is actually who is published the print edition, and I've emailed Ms. Perryman the links so that you teachers or students or just excited people at home can go access it directly. But the copies, it costs about $28 plus shipping. Unfortunately, the shipping's from Luxembourg, but still you can have the print copy pretty easy. I also, in the co-browser tab, have that website up if you want to take a look at that real quick. But hopefully you will get an email with that link. So I actually want to start big, and I want to hear from you all what kinds of organisms you think about as living in the soil, because there's lots of things that we know and think about every day do. So I just want to start with what we would call megafauna. So go ahead and I'll give you 30 seconds again. Name some of the megafauna that you might expect to see in soil. These are the really big guys, and I put some pictures up here to kind of stir your brain cells, so have at it. Great. I'm seeing lots of responses, and these are exactly what I'm thinking of. We've got moles, voles, rabbits. Someone said meerkats. That's a great one. I hadn't even thought of that when I was prepping for this. Armadillos. That's a picture we have here. Groundhogs. We all just had Groundhog Day last week. Squirrels, hedgehogs, rats, mice. We have a burrowing owl here. They actually nest in the soil. All kinds of cool things. So yeah, soil can be a home to big things as well as tiny things. So I'm going to kind of work down the scale of the size of animals just to get us thinking about what lives there. And I promise this is going to get more complicated as we get smaller. The next category that we talk about in soil ecology is called macrofauna. So again, take 30 seconds. There's some pictures here to jog your brain. Let me know if someone just tossed that word out and said soil macrofauna, what would you be thinking of? Okay, great. Again, wonderful responses. I kind of think this is the category that I first started thinking about life in soil for sure. Ants, centipedes, earthworms, termites, millipedes, yep. Pill bugs, that's a great one. In fact, I do have a picture of a pill bug up here. And the pill bugs are isopods, so someone really knows their stuff. That's great. Those are super cool because they're actually related to crustaceans. They're one of the few terrestrial crustaceans out there. Ticks, yep. Um, grasshopper, beetles, yep, we got a bunch of beetles down here. Centipedes, roaches, bees, yes, there's a lot of bees that actually do live in the soil. Most bees native in North America actually nest in the soil, in the ground. Lions, okay. I know some people who have some nicknames for soil organisms. Wasps, yeah, yeah. So great. So you guys, yeah, this is exactly what we're thinking of. And this is kind of it's big enough we can go out and see it, hold it in our hands, play with it outside. And these guys are really important to soil because they break down some of the bigger stuff. So dead leaves, fallen dead trees, that kind of stuff. These organisms play a big role in breaking apart some of that really big, complicated stuff so that smaller things can get at it and access it. Beetles can play a big role in moving dung, manure around so that we don't have giant piles of manure everywhere. Also, beetles can play a big role in pollination, as we know bees do as well. Wasps, moths, butterflies, the larvae for them often do have a life stage that lives in the soil. So yeah, really important for all these kind of what we would call ecosystem services above and beyond just playing in the dirt. All right, we're getting smaller. This is what we'd call mesofauna. So hopefully these are starting to look a little more strange. Go ahead, take 30 seconds. Tell me what you're thinking about. Think about the pictures. Okay, some really great answers here. We've got maggots, parasites. So maggots is kind of a general term for a lot of these insect larvae that I briefly mentioned. And so some of those maggots actually grow up to be what we would call macrofauna, beetles and wasps and that sort of thing. Stink bugs, yep, that's probably in that zone between meso and macrofauna. Mesofauna are something you probably need a magnifying glass to see super well. Ticks, fleas, worms, scorpions. So yeah, I'm kind of tricking you out on this. The picture I have here is actually something called a pseudoscorpion. So scorpions we consider macrofauna. They do live in soil. But there's this whole class of other organisms called pseudoscorpions, and they're actually super tiny. So sometimes you need a little magnification to see them, but they look like a scorpion because they have those pinchers. This is not going to look good online. Pinchers out in front. I also see ticks, tardigrades. So we're going to get to tardigrades. We're not quite small enough yet for tardigrades. Spider, that again sometimes is macrofauna depending on how big it is. Protura, all right, somebody's on board with that. Springtail. So yeah, these are all really clever things, and these are things that honestly I think I was in college before I knew half this stuff existed. Springtails are also known as columbella, and I've got a couple of pictures of here. I think these are some of the cutest soil organisms out there. You can sometimes see them if you look closely enough, but sometimes it's helpful if you have a little, just like a magnifying glass is usually good enough. They are called springtails because they have this little appendage that kind of latches on to debris, and they can spring themselves or kind of throw themselves, fling themselves a distance of quite a few feet. So it's a really great way for them to get away from danger or find a new spot for fresh food. And again, a tremendous amount of diversity in those bugs. These Protura, this was something that, again, I was definitely an adult before I figured out what the Protura were. These are little, they have 6 legs or arthropods. They have little antennae. Again, you probably need a magnifying glass to see them, but they're a really important bug that breaks down dead leaves and dead plant material and makes that possible. We have mites, and those are kind of related to ticks in some ways. The mites tend to be much smaller, and there's lots of mites in the soil. And in fact, mites tend to be a top predator in soil food webs. They eat a lot of the smaller stuff that we're going to see in just a minute. So they're really important in pulling those carbon and nitrogen components that bacteria and fungi have made part of their bodies and incorporating them into bigger organisms. And then things like insects will often eat the mites. Diplora is another weird one. These guys, they kind of look like earwigs, but they're not related to earwigs. They're different. They have these real long antennae that quiver a lot, and then they have these back antennae. They're not really antennae, but these structures that come out their hind end. And then our first kind of small worm here, we have inky triads. These are kind of distant cousins to earthworms. They're a little bit different. Sometimes they get called potworms. They tend to live in a little more organic, rich soil. You find them in a flower pot you might have on your front step. And again, they're a little bit smaller, but they have segments. They tend to be clear. They don't have that kind of red color that a lot of the earthworms do. So that's super cool. All right, moving on down the scale, we're going to get into microfauna. So I'll give you your 30 seconds. What are you thinking about here? Are there any ideas out there? I haven't seen anything pop up on my chat. Oh, here we go. I need to scroll down. That would be my problem. User error on that one. Dust mites, tardigrades, bacteria, tardigrade, amoeba, tapeworm. All right, all right. Any other ideas? Paramecium. All right. Yeah, so these are really great ideas, and you are all thinking about the right thing. These are, again, things that I didn't think about until I was, kind of beyond high school. So we do have tardigrades. These are, in the soil world, we call these our charismatic microfauna. They're really cute. People love them for good reason. They're these cute little roly-poly things, and sometimes we call them a water bear, or some of my colleagues in Europe and Australia call them moss piglets, which I think is just the greatest name. I don't know why we don't use it here. But they have this little snout, and they kind of wander around soil and plant material, and some of them eat bacteria, and some of them eat other little microfauna, some of them eat fungi, some of them eat plant material directly. And one of the cool things about tardigrades is they can survive all kinds of conditions. So we can find tardigrades in Antarctica. We can find tardigrades probably in your backyard. They're just everywhere. Top of a mountain, swamps. They can survive a lot of cool stuff. Some of the other pictures I have up here include nematodes, which are roundworms. So some of you might be thinking of roundworms as a parasite, and they are. It's the same family. A few nematodes are parasites. Sometimes when they cause problems in humans, we call them helminths. But nematodes are a huge, diverse group, and most of them live in soil, and most of them are really helpful. They can eat bacteria. They can suppress diseases like fungal diseases. They play a really important role in turning over nutrients and making them available. There are some nematodes that can cause diseases on crops, so something like soybean cyst nematode are problems. So nematodes are both helpful and harmful. It just depends on which species or subspecies you happen to be working with. But they're hugely diverse, super cool, and you need a microscope to see these. They're worms, but they're too small to see with just your eyes. And they don't have segments. That's kind of the thing that sets them apart from some other worms. And then the other picture I put up here is rotifer, and one of the questions is, what in the world is a rotifer? So a rotifer is a very small animal. Again, you need a microscope to see them. They live in soil. They also live in water. If you do like a pond water drop on a microscope slide and look under a microscope, you can often see rotifers. And rotifers have this kind of tail, which helps them move around. And then they have these little cilia hairs up at the top that beat, which you can kind of see from this picture. It's blurry. They're beating. And what this does is it pushes plant material or bacteria or in water, sometimes zooplankton, into their gut, which is here, and you can kind of see the algae that this guy's been eating, where they can digest it for energy. And so they swim around and they have these really cool beating things. Yeah, they're just another cool animal that we don't think about because we can't see them very easily. So they're a super cool organism in the soil. I hope that answers your question well enough. If not, get back to me. We're going to move on to the next category, which is plants. So tell me what you think about plants. Okay, I see a few responses on plants. Green, oxygen, happy. Great, great. Are there any others that want to chime in? Medicine, okay. Smells good, food, yep. Valentine's Day is coming up. Plants can be an important symbol for humans on that day. Lovely, photosynthesis, yeah. Yeah, so these are exactly right. So one of the key things about plants is that they photosynthesize, and this is why plants are green. That green color is capturing sunlight, which gives them the energy to take carbon dioxide out of the air and actually link it together into a chain to produce sugars that the plant can use for energy. And there's some other smaller organisms that can also photosynthesize, but plants are the main one. And so they're really important for the soil because they're this link between the above ground and the below ground. They're taking gases out of the atmosphere, CO2, they're producing oxygen, which is good for the atmosphere, and they're actually turning that into plant parts, and that can include leaves and shoots and flowers. It can also include roots, and these roots are really important in the soil. They're what feeds all these awesome organisms that live in the soil. Some organisms eat the roots directly, some of them eat dead roots, and these roots tend to secrete kind of sugary goo, is a good way, Kool-Aid, plant Kool-Aid, into the soil, and that feeds a lot of soil organisms, especially bacteria. These are pretty simple sugars. So it's a way to pull that carbon out of the atmosphere, bring it below ground. So this is a really important when we think about that kind of full carbon cycle and completing that link. The plant is the connection between our gas phase and this solid organic matter phase in the soil. So that's really good. We eat plants, wildlife eats plants. They're really important organisms. They're really important things for everybody on Earth, and they're important to the soil. So I've got just a couple more that we're going to talk about, then I'm going to kind of pull out and talk a little bit about how we study soil organisms. So fungi, this is actually my all-time favorite. So tell me what you think about fungi. Poison. Okay, I see some great answers here. Poison, there are definitely some very poisonous mushrooms out there. Mushrooms are a type of fungi, natural. Yuck. I know, not everyone's a fan, but they're cool. Medicine, fungi are really important for medicine, yep. It can grow on you in some cases, yeah, it can. Stinky, everywhere. Yes, that's the best answer. Fungi are everywhere. So yeah, so what makes fungi fungi? They're multicellular, they have a lot of cells, but sometimes they live in a life phase that may only have one or two cells. So fungi both can be the biggest organism. In fact, the largest organism on Earth is a fungus in the forests in Oregon. It's actually about the size of the state of Rhode Island. It's a really big fungus because it's just a giant network of mycelia, which are these kind of stringy components that filter through the soil. And fungi are special because they have a substance called chitin in the cell wall. So not everything can degrade them, so that's part of why they're really good at what they do. Fungi eat dead things, so sometimes those dead things are plants, some like dead trees. Sometimes they're animals, sometimes they're us. There are certain species of fungi that are really good at eating other organisms, and they can get a little overexcited and become parasites or pathogens. They can cause disease because the thing they're trying to eat isn't dead yet. So there's a lot of crop diseases that can be fungi, but there's a lot of fungi that are super helpful. So actually a lot of our antibiotics actually come from fungi that live in soil. Things like penicillin all come from these fungi in the soil. Some of them are edible, and some people find them delicious, others don't. Some of them are poisonous, so never eat something that you just pick up out of the woods. Some of them can look very similar, so you have to be very careful. And some of them glow in the dark. I put a picture here. This fungus lives in Sri Lanka, but it glows in the dark at night. It's what we call bioluminescence. So fungi are just super cool. They're everywhere, and they can do just about anything. And they're really cool because they have the ability to eat a lot of dead things. I kind of mentioned this before we got started with that early question, that they eat a lot of things that other organisms can't eat. So that's part of why they're really successful. All right, protists. Tell me what that means to you. And it's okay to type in question marks if protist doesn't mean anything. Cholera. Okay, so I see some question marks and I see not very many responses, which is fine. This is definitely the curveball for the day. I'll be kinder to you after this. Protists are actually kind of the question mark category for biologists too. They are single-celled organisms, but they have a nucleus, so they're not bacteria. Um, Sometimes these populations of single-celled organisms kind of live together in a way that they might look like a multicellular organism to us. So slime molds are a really good example of that. I got a picture here. This is called dog vomit slime mold for obvious reasons. It looks like dog vomit. And this is actually a population of probably millions of single-celled protist organisms, but they all come together in this kind of colony, and it looks like a multicellular organism. And you can find these slime molds out in the woods if you go looking for them. It's probably too cold in many parts of the world, but if you're tuning in from South Florida or Louisiana, you might be able to find them out in the woods this time of year. A couple of the responses included cholera and giardia, so those were good thoughts. Both of those, I believe, are actually bacteria, but there are some protists that cause diseases. One of them actually caused the Irish potato famine. So if you've studied that in history class, that was a protist, Phytophthora infestans, that infected the potatoes in Ireland and caused severe food shortages for those people. And so the cool thing here is that scientists actually thought this organism, this disease, the potato disease, was a fungus for a very long time. And it was only in the 1980s that we discovered it was actually something in this protist category. So the point is, we're, as scientists, still learning so much about biodiversity on Earth. And protists tend to be kind of this grab bag of science. They're kind of the things that scientists go, we don't actually know what's going on with these guys. They kind of wind up in this protist group. So it's not something that we talk about a lot in classes, especially because there's so much other stuff we do know. Protists get a little ignored. So I put that in there because they are important for soils. All right, and this is the last organism group we're going to talk about, bacteria. Tell me what you think about bacteria. Okay, I see some great answers here. So scary, it's everywhere, E. coli, there's a lot of bacteria that cause diseases. Yogurt, that's a really great response. So actually a lot of the yogurts actually contain fungi as well, the lactobacillus, but some of them are bacteria as well. It's kind of a mixture of those components in yogurt. And that's actually just, this is a bit tangential, but what's going on in yogurt is we're using microbes, bacteria and fungi to digest proteins in milk, and then we kind of eat this product that's partially digested, and for some people it's easier to digest that because our bodies don't have to do all that hard work. The microbes have done part of it for us. Good, sick, food, staphylococcus, there's a great one. So yeah, oops, let me get my words up here. So yeah, so bacteria are everywhere. They're definitely the biggest group of organisms on Earth, but they're a single cell, so we don't see them without a really good microscope. And the key thing here is bacteria don't have a nucleus, so that really sets them apart. So as you mentioned, bacteria are everywhere and they do all kinds of cool things. I've just highlighted a couple of my favorite fun facts here because I couldn't help myself. Cyanobacteria. This is a type of bacteria that can do photosynthesis at certain points in time. And these were the first organisms to produce oxygen on Earth as a living organism through what we'd call a biotic process. As a living organism through what we'd call a biotic process. There was oxygen on Earth beforehand, but it was abiotic processes. And so cyanobacteria are actually responsible for the buildup of oxygen in our atmosphere. Plants couldn't evolve until the oxygen was at a high enough quantity because plants do regular cellular respiration in addition to photosynthesis. So cyanobacteria are really the true champions of oxygen on Earth, and they continue to be a source of oxygen on Earth. Actinobacteria are responsible for that smell after it rains, and you go outside and you're like, that great, earthy, rainy smell. Those are produced by a genus of actinobacteria called Streptomyces. And again, most of our antibiotics come from soil bacteria or fungi. So some of our soil bacteria can cause diseases, but a lot of the soil bacteria can actually help us fight diseases and keep us healthy. And as I mentioned, they're really important in breaking down complex material that we bigger organisms can't. And in fact, that's in part why there's so many bacteria that live in our gut. When we eat something, those bacteria are doing a lot of work for our bodies to break down things like apples and asparagus and Cheetos. So they're really helpful. They're doing the same job in our bodies as they do in the soil, and we need them. So I've got a little bit more time left, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we study soil biodiversity. But before I dive into that too much, are there any questions that you all have that you want me to address about soil biodiversity? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. I haven't forgotten the wildfire question. Oh, here we go. Can we study soil without a handheld microviewer? Yes. There are different, as I mentioned, there's different parts of soil. So some of those bigger organisms I talked about, especially the earthworms and the insects, that sort of thing, you can study those without a microscope. There's a lot of those are big enough you can get at. Certainly the burrowing mammals that I mentioned earlier also, I have some colleagues that do that work and they never use a microscope. So it is possible. It depends on what you're focusing on. So that's actually a really good lead-in to kind of how we study soil biodiversity. So I kind of broke this into 3 parts. Oh, and which types of soil have the most biodiversity? Oh, that is a wonderful question. And there's actually a whole section in this Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas about that. And I'll go ahead and address that and then jump into my field work here. So the types of soil that have the most soil biodiversity we're really still learning about this, but it turns out soil biodiversity is a little bit more widely distributed than plant diversity or animal diversity. So if you've been thinking about this, you've probably heard that, you know, the equator region has the highest biodiversity in terms of plant and animal life, the tropical forests, that sorts of things. And there is a tremendous amount of soil biodiversity in those systems. But there's actually almost as much soil biodiversity in the grasslands of North America or the deserts of the, you know, New Mexico and Arizona as there are in the tropics. Again, it kind of depends on which group you're looking at. So if you kind of think about nematodes are pretty diverse all around the world. Insect diversity is high, but it might vary between which genus or group you're thinking about. So this is a long answer. The short answer is we're not 100% sure, you know, soil X has the most biodiversity, but what we know is that soil biodiversity is actually more broadly distributed than just above ground biodiversity, and it doesn't follow necessarily the same pattern. So that's an exciting area of research that I'm involved in, my colleagues are involved in. We're trying to understand what is it that about soils that supports this high level of biodiversity around the world, and part of it's because it's a complex environment. I see a couple other questions. I'll come back to those at the end if I have time. I want to just highlight the ways that I study soil biodiversity. So my own work is mostly in grasslands and the farm fields of the central United States. I'm originally from Iowa. I went to high school in Indiana, and I've actually worked in Illinois. I worked for the Illinois Natural History Survey before I took this job in Colorado. So that's my home territory, and I love those environments. And I've spent a lot of time outside studying them. So when I go to study soil, I often take a look at the plant community, so that's what I'm doing here with some of my helpful assistants. Science is very much a group effort. I take a lot of assistants in the field to help me out. And when we go to look at the soil, we have to take a soil core. So sometimes we take a very small soil core, like you see here. That's if I'm going to be studying microbes, bacteria, fungi, we'll take. And we take that because there's no need to cause a bigger disturbance in the system than what's needed for us to answer our questions. So we try to be really conscious about how we impact the ecosystem we study. Sometimes I need a little bit bigger core, so here my good friend Charlotte and I are taking a larger soil core. This is helpful for thinking about soil as a habitat if we're thinking about bigger organisms. And then sometimes we need a really big core, and we get to pull out this tractor with a big hydraulic soil core on the back of it and actually go down. In this case, we're taking a soil core that's 1 meter deep, so that's about a little over 3 feet. And so, yeah, so we take all kinds of soil cores depending on what questions we're asking. And sometimes I collect soil in the winter, and sometimes I do it in the very hot summertime. Again, it just depends on what I'm asking about. We then have to take the soil back to the laboratory. And this harkens back to the question about, do you need a microscope or a hand lens? The work I do mostly is with microorganisms, but I actually do a lot of molecular work. So my colleagues and I bring it back to the lab, and we actually break apart those soil cores, we sieve it, and then we can take a scoop of soil and in the laboratory do some really neat chemistry. And sometimes we pull out the DNA from the soil so we can look at which organisms are there. Sometimes we actually measure what those microorganisms are eating, like I talked about. And we try to put all those pieces together to understand not only how diverse the soil is, but also how that diversity affects things like carbon and nitrogen cycling and water quality and those sorts of things. So this is just a snapshot of what it kind of looks like in the lab. Sometimes I look under a microscope, but a lot of times I'm actually just doing chemistry in a lab. But I have colleagues that also, like I said, don't necessarily need a microscope to look at the soil components they're doing. And then the final part of studying soil is sharing the information, which is something I'm doing this morning with all of you. If I just go look at this stuff and keep it to myself, it doesn't help anybody. So as scientists, we share our knowledge in a lot of ways. Sometimes we put together posters and take them to conferences. So this is a student I've worked with in the past, Kira, and she's put together this lovely poster showing what we found in the soil after we pulled it apart in the lab. Sometimes I go and give talks, like I'm doing here on the right. Sometimes that's to other scientists. Sometimes it's to classrooms, like you all. Sometimes it's to farmers. Sometimes it's to workshops. We also write papers, so we tell other scientists what we've been doing. So these tend to be long, dense papers. But then I also try to work really hard to write some blog posts, and I'm on Twitter to share my science insights in a broader way. So I've also, the email with the link, including the Atlas link, has some links to a few blog posts and podcasts I've done. If you want to learn more about my work specifically, you're welcome to check those out. All right, so there's some great questions here, and I think I have enough time to kind of hit on all these. I'm going to go ahead and put this slide up so you can see my contact info, and I might bounce back and forth a little bit, so I'll try and keep that up as much as I can. So quick question, what is your favorite soil? So my favorite soil is a mollisol. These are the soils that are dominant in the central part of the U.S., the Midwest. These are really deep, dark, black soils. This is what I grew up, you know, getting muddy in the yard and making mud pies. That's the kind of soil that I've grown up with, and I love it. I love all soils, but I particularly love mollisol. I'm actually going to loop back and try and hit that wildfire question from the beginning and then come back to these other questions. So wildfire is a really great question, and that's actually, I have had the fortune to work with some fire angles. So I've got a couple pictures here. Let me see, here's some good fire pictures. So I am a certified wildland firefighter, and because I've worked in the Midwest, I've done a lot of prescribed fires on restored grasslands in the Midwest. So these are just a couple snapshots from some fires that I've participated on. And fire is a really important part for grasslands because grasslands are a system that needs some disturbance, and sometimes grazing animals cause that disturbance. Sometimes wildfires cause that disturbance, and we know historically those were very common things in these systems. We know there was grazing, we know there was wildfire, and we know Native Americans used both of those tools in the ways that they lived off of the land as well. The effects of fire on soil organisms is an exciting question that some scientists are just starting to dive into. In many respects, soil organisms are they're not affected by the heat of fire as much because most of these fires are very quick, and the heat only penetrates the very top couple of centimeters. So if you live 5 centimeters or more, so that's about an 2 inches or more below the surface of the ground, you're probably not going to really notice. Big wildfires in forests that might generate a lot more heat that heat can go further down into the soil, so there can be some heat impacts there. But the big thing that changes is all of this dead plant material gets burned up and transferred into actually pretty easy to digest things, and what we actually get is an input of nitrogen. All that nitrogen that was in that dead plant material is released, and the soil organisms, especially the bacteria and microbes, love it. They go crazy, and that's part of why you see a lot of fresh green growth in the week or two after a fire, is the plants are responding to that nutrient input that the microbes are using in those systems. It's also cool when you do a fire, you see a lot of raptors will come in right after the fire because all the little mice and voles that live in the soil don't realize that their home has just been burned away, and they pop up to go forage, and there's no cover, and so the raptors can get an easy meal, and so that's always that's a big impact on some of those larger organisms. So hopefully that addresses that question. I'm going to hop back to my contact and tap into a few other questions. Are we smelling waste gas from streptomyces after the rain? So yeah, you're smelling a gas, a volatile component that's released. It's actually probably the release from an increase in activity they're eating because they have a lot of water that's connected them with the food they're eating. So yeah, that's what we're smelling there. You're right, we're not actually smelling the bacteria itself. How much water can soil hold? It can hold a lot of water, and this is a tricky question because it can vary a lot between different kinds of soil. So it's hard to answer in a general way. But there's a couple of key things. The more organic matter the soil has, the more of that yummy brown, black stuff that's really the byproduct of decomposition, that can hold a lot of water. This is in part because most of the molecules in that organic matter are charged. So charged water molecules bind with the charged organic matter, and it holds a lot of water. So generally, more organic matter means soil will hold more water. Soils, a lot of soils from a native system, like a forest or a grassland, can hold as much water as they are. So I'm not saying this right. If you had a kilogram of soil, it could hold about a kilogram of water. Now, as you move into other systems where maybe things are more compact or more dense, that amount gets lower. So maybe you have a kilogram of soil and it could hold, 80% of that or 50% of that as water. So that'd be. So hopefully that answers that question. I know it's not very precise and it's tricky. It's easier when I have a soil to think about. When a plant dies, how does it affect the soil? So that's a really great question. When a plant dies, it lays down on the soil and these organisms tear it apart. And so this is actually a really important thing. Soil is what I see as the connection between death and life. When a plant dies, the organisms living in the soil tear it apart, they recycle it, they use those nutrients, they use that energy. And in that process, they release energy and nutrients that plants that are growing can actually use. So a dead plant actually helps new plants grow. A dead plant helps all kinds of soil organisms from the Protura and the beetles down to the bacteria and the fungi to live. That's where they get their energy and nutrients. If you didn't have dead plants, you wouldn't have these organisms. And yeah, so it's a balance, it's a cycle, and different soils are going to have kind of a different equilibrium between how dead stuff gets incorporated into soil and recycled into living things. But that's the critical loop there. Okay, I think I've hit most of these. Do you do other FaceTime lectures for science groups? I haven't, but I would be happy to look into that. So hopefully, yeah, my contact info, hopefully the email that Ms. Perryman's forward would have my email. Feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to look into it. And if I have enough time, I think we have 2 minutes left. How does climate change affect soils? That's another really great question, and it's a question that we scientists are working on every day. It definitely does affect soils. A big new thing that it was just published in December is that as temperatures get warmer, the cycling of carbon and nitrogen actually gets faster. The microorganisms are breaking down that dead stuff faster, and that actually results in more respiration of the soil. It actually returns more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So we actually think that there could be what we would call a positive feedback, that the warmer it gets, the faster the microbes work, the more greenhouse gases are produced from natural systems, which would reinforce that warming, and you kind of get on a treadmill that way. So that's just one example. There's many out there, and there's many interacting factors. Precipitation's a big one. There's lots of questions out there. So. Great. Well, thank you all for tuning in. It was really a pleasure. Let me know if you have any questions. And like I said, please contact me, and good luck with the rest of the day.